The night I found out, I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just stood in the kitchen holding a dish towel, staring at the text message on his phone that he'd left face up on the counter, like he didn't even care anymore. Maybe he didn't. 23 years. That's how long Leonard and I had been married. Long enough that I'd stopped thinking of myself as a separate person. Long enough that when he looked at me, I still half expected to see the man who used to drive 4 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu in my second year of university. Long enough that the word divorce felt like a word in a foreign language. I could read it. I understood what it meant, but it had nothing to do with me. His name was still on the texts. Joanna. With a little heart emoji after it. I set the dish towel down very carefully, folded it in half, put it on the counter, and then I walked upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and didn't move for a long time. By the time Leonard came home that evening, I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to beg. I had spent 23 years making myself smaller so that he could feel larger, and I was done. Our daughter Elise was 20 and living in residence at Dalhousie. Our son Marcus had moved out 2 years earlier, working up north on a contract job. The house was just the two of us now, and I realized, sitting on that bed, that it had felt empty for a long time before I ever found that phone. I told him I knew. He didn't deny it. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said he was sorry, but the way he said it, quietly, with his eyes somewhere near my left shoulder, told me he was mostly sorry to be caught. He said he hadn't meant for it to go this far. I asked him how far it had gone. He looked at his hands. That told me everything. I said I wanted him to leave the house while I figure out what I needed to do. He said he wasn't sure that was fair. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, and I think that scared him a little, because he left that same night. The first week, I was fine. Eerily fine. I cleaned the whole house, reorganized the pantry, called Elise and told her without crying, which surprised both of us. She wanted to come home. I told her to finish her semester. I called a lawyer. A woman I'd met once at a community fundraiser who had kind eyes and a reputation for being thorough. She told me what to expect. We had the house, a bit of savings, his pension, and 23 years of shared life to untangle. It wasn't going to be quick. The second week is when it started to unravel. The mortgage on the house was in both our names, but Leonard had been the one managing the finances. I had worked part-time for years. First when the kids were small, then because it had just become habit, then because Leonard said it wasn't worth the stress of full-time when he made enough for both of us. What I did not know, what I found out when I sat down with our bank statements, was how little enough actually was. He had been pulling money into a separate account for at least 2 years, not a dramatic amount, not movie villain stuff, but steady and quiet, like water wearing down a stone. The lawyer said it was common. She said it like that was supposed to make me feel better. I had access to our joint account. There was enough to cover the mortgage for maybe 3 months if I was careful. After that, I didn't know. My part-time hours at the dental office, where I'd worked for 11 years, had been cut the previous spring. I was picking up shifts where I could, but it wasn't close to enough. The lawyer's retainer alone was more than I'd made in the past 2 months. I did the math. I did it 3 times, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. My mother, Roberta, lived 40 minutes away in Oakville. She'd been widowed 6 years earlier, lived alone in the house she and my father had owned since before I was born. I knew she had a spare bedroom. 2, actually. I had grown up in that house. I called her on a Thursday night. I explained the situation. All of it, the texts, Leonard leaving, the finances, what the lawyer had said. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking her to fix anything. I just needed a place to stay while I got my footing. A few months maybe. Just until the divorce proceedings were further along and I could sort out what I was actually going to have access to. There was a long pause on the phone. She said, "Well, you know the situation here." I didn't, actually. I asked her what situation. She said my brother Gordon and his wife had been having a hard time with their youngest, and she was spending a lot of time supporting them, driving back and forth, and she just didn't think she had the bandwidth right now to also be dealing with my problems. I want to be very precise about what she said, because I have replayed it 100 times since. She said my problems, not my situation, not what I was going through. My problems. Like they were a personal failing. Like I had manufactured them. I told her I wasn't asking her to deal with anything. I was asking for a room. She said she thought it would be better if I sorted this out on my own. She said she'd raised me to be capable. She said I'd figure it out. I said goodnight. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and I thought, okay. I called my brother Gordon the next day. I didn't ask him for anything. Just called to talk, I told myself, just to hear a voice. But somewhere in the conversation I mentioned that I was looking at options for where to stay and he cut me off before I got 3 words in. He said he and Christine were completely overwhelmed right now, the kids were a handful. Christine's hours had increased at work, and they just couldn't take anything else on. He wasn't unkind about it exactly. He was just efficient. He wrapped it up in under 4 minutes. My friend Dorothy had been my closest friend since we were both young mothers at the same playgroup in Burlington. We'd been through her first husband's affair, her second marriage, her kids' troubles, and my father's illness together. I had sat with her in a hospital waiting room for 11 hours when her mother had a stroke. I called her that Friday. She listened. She was sympathetic, genuinely. She said it was terrible, it really was. And then she said that she and Frank had been talking about it, and they just felt like they were at capacity right now. And they hoped I understood that it wasn't personal. They'd been talking about it. That meant she had already discussed me with Frank before I even called. She had made the decision before I asked. I said I understood completely. I told her not to worry about it. I hung up the phone and I went to the bathroom and I turned on the shower and I sat down in the bathtub and I cried for probably 40 minutes. The kind of crying where you can't catch your breath, the kind that feels like it has weight. Then I got out, dried off, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table with that tea and I thought about my options. I had a car. It was a 2016 Honda Civic. Mine outright, no payments. I had roughly $400 in my personal account, separate from the joint account. I had a part-time job that gave me maybe 22 hours a week at the dental office. I had a lawyer working on my behalf. And I had a house I couldn't afford to stay in alone for more than 3 months. What I said to myself sitting there was 3 words. I didn't say them out loud, but I remember thinking them very clearly. And they were not hopeful words or inspirational words, they were just, I'm not done. That's what I whispered. Not a promise, not a plan, just a fact. The dental office where I worked was called Lakeview Family Dental, and my boss, Dr. Hendricks, was a decent man who had always been fair with me. When the hours had been cut the previous spring, it wasn't about me. The practice had taken on a new associate dentist who needed the administrative hours to make his arrangement work. It wasn't personal. A lot of things in my life lately were turning out to be not personal, which somehow didn't make them hurt less. I went in on a Monday and asked if there was any possibility of increasing my hours. He said he'd see what he could do. A week later, he gave me back 5 hours a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. I also started quietly, looking at what else I could do. I had spent the better part of my adult life being organized in service of other people, Leonard's schedule, the kids' appointments, the household, the running of a family in a mid-sized Canadian city, where life is expensive and the winters are long. What I had, underneath all of that, was a brain that worked well with systems. I could organize anything. I had learned dental billing by just watching for a few months when I first started at the practice. I was good with numbers when they were numbers I actually had access to. I looked into bookkeeping courses. There's a program through George Brown, fully online. You can do it around any schedule, and it qualifies you to do freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. The cost was real and it made me anxious, but my lawyer had sent a letter about temporary financial support during proceedings, and Leonard's response, through his lawyer, had been to agree to a small monthly amount just to avoid making things worse for himself. It wasn't generous, but it was enough, combined with what I was making, to cover the course and still pay the mortgage for a few more months. I signed up. I started studying at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, after my shifts, with the televisions, and a glass of water and my reading glasses, and the house quiet around me, in a way that had stopped feeling lonely and started feeling like something else. Like space. Like mine. I also called a financial advisor, a woman named Patricia that my lawyer recommended, who specialized in women going through late-in-life financial transitions. That phrase, late in life, bothered me when I first heard it. I was 52. Was that late in life? But Patricia didn't treat me like I was late for anything. She treated me like someone at the beginning of a project, which is what she said I was. She helped me see what I actually had. The house, once the divorce was finalized, would likely be sold, and my portion of the equity would be substantial. Not enough to buy another home outright in this market, but enough for a solid down payment. Leonard's pension, because we'd been married over 20 years, meant I was entitled to a portion. The savings he'd been moving around would be factored in once the financial disclosure process was complete. It wasn't going to happen fast. But it was going to happen. You're not starting from nothing, Patricia said. You're starting from 52, which is different. I thought about that a lot. Elise came home for a weekend in November. She was furious at her father in the way that only daughters can be. Comprehensively, without nuance, and with a loyalty to me that sometimes made me feel guilty even though I hadn't done anything wrong. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and looked at me for a while. Are you okay, Mom? Like actually? I thought about it honestly, which she deserved. I think I'm getting there, I said. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm moving. She reached across and squeezed my hand. She said, I'm proud of you. My 20-year-old daughter said she was proud of me, and I had to look out the window for a moment so I wouldn't cry. The divorce took 18 months to finalize. That is not unusual in Ontario. The lawyers go back and forth. Financial disclosure takes time. Leonard's side pushed back on a few things that ultimately didn't amount to much but delayed everything by a few months. I stayed in the house the whole time. Which was part of the agreement. I maintained it. Kept it in good condition. And we would sell it once things were final. During those 18 months, I finished the bookkeeping course. I passed. I then completed the additional certification for payroll, which took another 4 months. I started taking on small clients on the side. A hair salon in Hamilton, a small landscaping company, a woman who sold pottery at farmers markets and needed someone to track her expenses so she could stop dreading tax season. It wasn't full-time income yet, but it was growing, and every month it grew a little more. I also, in the middle of all of this, discovered something about myself. I was actually good at this. Not just competent, good. I understood quickly where small businesses were losing money, where they could simplify, where they were paying for things that didn't make sense. The landscaping company owner told me I'd saved him more in the first 3 months than my fees for the whole year. The pottery woman said she finally didn't wake up at 3 in the morning anxious about money. I found that I liked solving those problems. I liked the clarity of it. After decades of feeling like my brain was being used at maybe 40% of I was running at full speed, and it felt, honestly, it felt like waking up. By the time the house sold, I had enough freelance income coming in that I was no longer dependent on the divorce settlement to survive. That was the thing I had been working toward without naming it. Independence that didn't require anyone else to come through for me. The house sold quickly. We got a good price. The market had held, which neither of us had counted on. My portion, after the mortgage was paid out, was just over $280,000. Combined with the pension split and the settlement, I had something I had never had in my adult life. Financial ground under my feet that belonged entirely to me. I've an apartment in a neighborhood I'd always liked. Older building, good bones, hardwood floors, a balcony that got afternoon light. The rent was manageable against what I was making. I moved in on a Thursday with Elise and her boyfriend, and Marcus drove down from up north to help, and we ate pizza on the floor of the new living room, with nowhere to sit because the furniture hadn't arrived yet, and it was one of the best evenings I can remember in a long time. I want to tell you about the things that happened in the months after I moved in, because I think they matter. My mother called in January, about 6 weeks after I'd settled into the apartment. She had heard through Gordon that the divorce was finalized. She asked how I was doing in a careful voice, like she was stepping around something. I told her I was well. She said she was glad. There was a pause and then she said she hoped I wasn't still upset about our conversation from before. I told her honestly that I wasn't upset. That was true. I had been for a while. But somewhere in the past 18 months, the feeling had shifted from hurt to something quieter and harder to name. A kind of clarity maybe. About who I could count on and who I couldn't. About the value of finding out even if the way you find out is brutal. She said she hoped we could have dinner sometime. I said maybe in the spring. Gordon sent a message in February. Just a quick text. Heard things worked out, good for you, hope you're well. I read it twice and then put my phone down. I thought about calling back. I thought about what I would say. I decided I didn't have enough to say yet, so I waited. Dorothy was different. Dorothy showed up at my door in October, 3 months after I'd moved in, with a bottle of Riesling and her coat still on. She stood in the doorway looking at the apartment behind me. The furniture by then, the bookshelves, the little lemon tree on the balcony that I'd started keeping as a project. And she looked like she might cry. "I'm sorry," she said. "I need to say that first. What we did wasn't right and I knew it at the time and I still did it and I'm sorry." I let her in. We drank the wine. We talked for 4 hours. I won't pretend that it fixed everything or that I felt immediately like we were back to where we'd been. But Dorothy is someone who can look at herself honestly, which is a rarer quality than people think. We're still figuring it out. That's real, and I'll take real over tidy. Leonard moved in with Joanna. He sends the occasional email about some shared administrative thing, a piece of mail forwarded, a question about a tax document. He's polite. I'm polite back. I don't hate him. I'm not sure what I feel, honestly. Something in the vicinity of done. Elise is in her 3rd year now. She calls every Sunday, sometimes more. She has her father's stubbornness and my organizational instincts, and she's going to be formidable. Marcus came down for Easter and told me the apartment felt like me in a way the old house never did. I thought about that for days. Here is what I want to say to you. If you're somewhere I was 2 years ago, I did not see this coming. Not the marriage falling apart, not my family turning away, not the financial situation I found myself in, not any of it. I was 52 years old and I had built my identity so thoroughly around being Leonard's wife, and my children's mother, and my parents' capable daughter, that when those structures cracked, I didn't know where I ended and they began. What I found out, and I want to be honest that it took a long time to find out, is that I was still in there. The person who could learn bookkeeping at 52 at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night. She was in there. The person who could negotiate with a lawyer and talk to a financial advisor and sit down with numbers that were frightening and make sense of them. She was in there too. The person who could look at a small business owner's chaos and see the pattern and fix it. I had no idea she existed. I found her in the rubble. The night my mother told me she didn't have the bandwidth, I felt something crack that has not fully healed. I am not going to pretend otherwise. There are still moments, small, unexpected moments, when I feel the absence of what I thought I had. A phone call I wanted to make and didn't. A holiday that looked different than it used to. That's real, and I think it will probably always be a little real. But what I also have now, which I did not have before, is the knowledge that I can stand on my own ground. Not because someone believed in me. Not because I had support or a safety net or anyone who showed up when I needed it most. But because when there was nowhere to go, I went forward anyway, and it turned out that was enough. I'm not who I was 2 years ago. I'm not who I thought I'd be at 54. I'm someone I didn't know existed. Living in an apartment with a lemon tree on the balcony, and a client list that keeps growing, and a daughter who calls every Sunday, and a sense of my own life that feels, for the first time in a very long time, entirely mine. And if you're sitting somewhere right now, doing the math on a piece of paper and not liking the numbers, if someone who should have shown up didn't, if you're looking at the next 6 months and you can't see past them, I want you to know this. The person who can handle this is already in you. You might not know her yet. You might not find her until you have no other option. But she's there. I found mine at 52, at a kitchen table, in the quiet of a house that was too expensive to keep, with a dish towel folded on the counter and a text message I can't unsee. And 3 words that weren't a plan or a promise. Just a fact.